curious about, pull out the key insights, and basically give you a shortcut to getting up to speed.
Yeah, cutting through the noise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So today, we're looking at something, well, a bit different in the entrepreneurship world. We always hear about starting from scratch, right?
Right, the classic startup story.
But we're diving into buying an existing business instead. We've got this great YouTube video featuring James Camp. People call him the master of buying and selling businesses.
And it's a perspective that often gets missed, which, makes it really valuable, especially if you're someone who wants knowledge efficiently, maybe wants to avoid that feeling of being totally overwhelmed, which you can get starting something new.
Totally. Buying something already running could be a smarter way in, maybe.
It really could.
What I liked about Camp stuff, I first saw him on Twitter, is how practical it feels. It's not just like vague passive income talk. He gives real examples. Like in the video intro, he talks about buying a blog. It was making something like $862 a month.
Okay, specific.
Yeah, and he lays out how you might, double that income and then sell it for a decent amount. Not like life-changing millions, but a solid, achievable win.
And that practicality is key, right? It grounds the whole idea, makes it feel less like some pie-in-the-sky thing and more like something, doable.
Right. And there's this other angle in the video, kind of a hot take, that I thought was interesting. Camp suggests that if you don't have a lot of money, well, the usual advice is be super safe, invest carefully.
Yeah, index funds, save diligently, all that.
But he kind of questions that. He says maybe you need to take more calculated shots, like buying a small business, precisely because you don't have a lot to start with. It might be the necessary path to actually build wealth.
That's a contrarian view. It flips the script on risk, suggesting being too safe might have its own costs if you're starting further behind.
Exactly. Makes you think, okay, so how did Camp even get into this? It sounds like his first deal was almost random.
Yeah, pretty much. His first buy was this site, uploadforever.com. Think file hosting, way back before Spotify and all that, pre-streaming era.
Oh, yeah, I remember those days, Napster vibes.
Totally. So he bought it, tweaked it, improved it, and figured out how to monetize it, ads, affiliate offers, that kind of thing.
And it worked?
Yeah. And he sold it surprisingly quickly for what felt like a good chunk of change back then. It wasn't huge, but it was proof of concept.
Okay, so early win. But then he didn't stick with it right away.
No, interestingly, he took this detour, became a club promoter for a while.
It's a different world.
Completely. But eventually, he circled back to what had actually worked, buying and improving those online businesses. He realized that initial success wasn't just a fluke.
Right. Sometimes you need to try other things to appreciate what you had.
Exactly. And it wasn't just his own experience. He talks about mentors who taught him about M&A mergers and acquisitions and value-add strategies like the big players use.
But he applied it to smaller stuff.
That was the key insight. He realized those same principles could work for tiny micro businesses, not just giant corporations.
Which brings us to that core idea, buy versus build. We're so conditioned to think entrepreneurship means start something new.
Yeah, the narrative is always get the big idea, build the world-changing app, the disruptive brand.
Right.
But Camp pushes back based on his own failures with startups. And he throws out that statistic, something like 90% of startups fail in the first 12 months.
90%. That's brutal. Really puts the risk in perspective.
It absolutely does. And that's where bonding comes in. He mentions the Lindy effect, basically. Things that have been around for a while are more likely to stay around.
Okay, so an existing business has already proven some level of survival.
It's jumped some hurdles. The biggest one for any startup is finding product market fit. Does anyone actually want this thing? Are they willing to pay?
Buying skips that step, mostly.
Often, yeah. Or at least gets you much further down the road. The business already exists. It has customers. It has revenue. It's overcome that initial inertia. Getting traction, building momentum from zero. That's the really hard part.
He talks about momentum.
Right.
Like scientifically and also kind of woo-woo.
Ha! Yeah, it's an interesting mix. The science part is simple physics, right? An object in motion tends to stay in motion.
Okay.
In business terms, once something has customers, revenue, processes, it has momentum. Growing that is usually easier than starting from a dead stop.
All right, pushing a boulder that's already rolling versus getting it moving in the first place.
Precisely. The woo-woo part is just acknowledging that this momentum feels like it has its own energy. An existing business is in motion. Your job is more about steering and accelerating, not inventing the engine from scratch. That's the aha moment, realizing you're buying something with a built-in head start.
That makes a lot of sense. It connects to motivation too, right?
Yeah.
The dopamine thing he mentions.
Totally. It's hard for most people to grind away for months or years with zero results. We're just not wired that way. We need those little wins, those dopamine hits.
Yeah, feedback that you're on the right track.
Exactly. Now, contrast starting from scratch with buying a business that's making some money, even a little, from day one.
Immediate positive feedback.
Right. That little bit of revenue proves the concept works. It gives you a massive psychological boost. It makes it so much easier to push through the harder, longer-term stuff needed for growth because you know the core idea isn't flawed.
That fits perfectly with wanting to learn fast but properly. Seeing results validates the effort.
For sure. Okay, so that leads to the next big myth. You need a boatload of money to buy a business.
Yeah. That's what most people think. He talks about $0 deals, though. Sounds kind of wild.
It does, but it's often about seller financing. Basically, the person selling the business finances the purchase for you.
How does that work?
Well, imagine someone wants to retire, or they just don't want to run their, say, small online store anymore. It's maybe like a side hustle for them.
Okay.
You come in, take over the operations, and instead of paying a lump sum up front, you agree to pay the seller a portion of the business's future earnings over time.
So the business itself pays for its own purchase, essentially.
Pretty much, yeah. The seller gets an income stream without the hassle of running it, and you get a business without needing huge capital up front. It's often a win-win, especially for smaller deals the big guys wouldn't touch.
Okay, that makes sense for smaller stuff. What about slightly bigger deals? Other financing options?
Yeah, there are more traditional routes, debt products, bank loans, though often for larger buys. SBA loans, Small Business Administration loans are common.
Do they require money down?
Usually, yes. Camp gives an example. A $500,000 business might need a 10% down payment, so $50,000.
Still a decent chunk of change.
It is, but even that $50,000 doesn't necessarily have to be all your own cash.
Oh, how else?
You could raise some equity, bring in partners who invest, or you could negotiate with the seller again. Maybe they finance part of that down payment too.
So you could combine things. A bit of your savings, maybe a small loan, and the seller helps finance the rest.
Exactly. It's called building a capital stack. Sounds fancy, but it's just figuring out how the deal gets paid for using different sources, debt, equity, seller financing. The goal is to make these finance concepts feel less intimidating, you know?
Yeah, breaking it down makes it seem much more accessible. Okay, so assuming you can figure out the financing, what size of business should you even be looking at?
That's a really good question, because not every size fits every buyer. The key thing Camp points out is that big private equity firms, they're generally not looking at businesses making less than, say, $5 million in revenue, and definitely not stuff under $500.
Why not?
The cost for them to do all the checks, the due diligence, it's just too high relative to the potential return on those smaller deals. It's not worth their time.
So that creates a space, an opportunity for individuals.
Exactly. It's a market inefficiency, really. But there's a flip side. If you buy something really small, like making only $1,200 a month, he mentioned, you probably can't expect it to be totally passive income. You're likely going to need to be pretty hands-on, at least initially.
Right. So what's a reasonable minimum amount of your own money to have before seriously looking?
He suggests maybe around $5,000 as a rough guideline to even start thinking about buying. Not that deals can't happen for less, but it's about having some buffer, not risking your entire financial stability.
Makes sense. Don't bet the farm on your first try.
Right. And if you have basically zero capital, he suggests maybe starting with a service business or an agency first, something where you are the main asset, your time and skills, then maybe level up to buying e-commerce or something later.
So there are different levels, different entry points.
Yeah, absolutely. There are opportunities at lots of different scales. You just need to find the right fit for your situation.
This whole idea, buying as an investment, it's different from just buying stocks.
Yeah.
You mentioned Martin Shkreli, controversial guy.
Yeah, very. But the point Camp referenced was Shkreli arguing that if you have, say, less than $130,000, maybe focusing on trying to match the S&P 500 isn't the best use of that capital.
Why not?
Because the potential upside is limited compared to finding higher growth opportunities. Shkreli's argument, or Camp's interpretation of it, is that you should be aiming for much higher returns with smaller sums, perhaps through business ventures, rather than settling for market averages.
So swinging for the fences a bit more.
Kind of, yeah. Or at least recognizing that traditional safe investments might not generate life-changing wealth from a small starting base. Camp contrasts something like an AT&T dividend low yield, pretty passive, with buying a business, which has higher potential return, but also obviously higher risk.
It depends on your goals and risk tolerance.
Completely. But his point is, if you want significant wealth creation, you usually need to take some calculated risks. And entrepreneurship through acquisition, buying a business, is one potentially less risky way than starting from absolute zero.
And he keeps emphasizing, especially at lower levels, forget true passive income. You need to be involved.
Yeah, that passive income dream often requires significant capital up front. With smaller acquisitions, expect to put in work to maintain and grow it.
Okay, let's make this more real. Can we talk about some actual examples of businesses bought?
Yeah, absolutely. He gives a few. One was Blue Angels Hearing, a direct-to-consumer hearing aid company.
Yeah.
This was part of a bigger strategy, a roll-up, where they bought several similar businesses. They grew its revenue massively from like $50K a month to $250K a month.
Wow, that's huge growth.
It was. And they sold it to a company called Open Store in less than a year for nearly $1 million. But big caveat here, he stresses this is not typical for a first acquisition. That's more advanced.
Right, managing expectations.
Got it.
Got it. What about something more? Entry level.
Okay, smaller scale.
Yeah.
He talked about buying a bunch of Instagram theme pages about skateboarding for $100,000
Okay.
and sold them a week later for $120,000.
A week.
Sounds like he knew the market, knew a potential buyer, and just facilitated a quick flip. Requires specific knowledge and connections, obviously.
Definitely not something everyone can replicate. Anything even smaller.
Yeah. The micro example. A blog about dog frisbees bought for $400 worth of Bitcoin.
$400? Seriously?
Yep. Sold it a year later for $1,200. Tiny deal, but it proves the concept works at all levels. And weirdly, the person who sold it ended up working for the buyer later on.
Huh. That's a funny twist. Shows possibilities even in tiny deals.
And one more quick one, a near miss. A small keyword research tool he saw on Flippa. The idea was, if you already had an audience interested in SEO, you could buy this cheap tool and market it to them, potentially growing it significantly.
Right. Leveraging an existing asset, your audience, to boost a new acquisition. That makes sense for online creators.
Exactly. So where do you actually find these businesses for sale? It's not like Craigslist, right?
Hopefully not.
No, there are different places. For bigger, higher quality, more expensive stuff, you have brokerages. Think FE International, Quiet Light, Empire Flippers. They vet the businesses pretty well.
Okay, so premium listings, premium prices. Probably not for first-timers with smaller budgets.
Generally, yeah. Then you have the marketplaces. Flippa.com is a big one. Also, Acquire.com. These have a much wider range, tiny sites to bigger ones, varying quality. You get to do more homework. Flippa apparently used to be sketchier, but has improved.
So more digging required, but more accessible.
Pretty much. There are also aggregators, like a site called Kumo, that try to pull listings from multiple places.
Like Zillow for businesses.
Kind of.
Yeah.
But the catch is, a lot of the really good deals now, especially the slightly bigger ones, get listed under NDA or require you to prove you have funds before you see details, so aggregators might miss some of the best stuff.
Oh, okay.
And Camp emphasizes, just like in real estate, the best deals are often found off-market. Meaning you proactively reach out to businesses you like that aren't officially listed for sale. Requires more effort, networking, but can uncover hidden gems.
Right, relationship building.
Okay.
So once you're looking, how do you decide what to even focus on? Seems overwhelming.
Yeah, you need criteria. Number 1, budget. Be realistic about what you can afford, including financing. We talked about maybe $25K, $50K, personal cash, potentially leveraging into a larger deal.
Got it. What else?
Your skills and interests. This is important, especially for smaller businesses where you might be more involved. If you actually like the niche or have relevant skills, it's a huge advantage. It's not just about the numbers when you're starting out.
So passion can actually be a factor.
It definitely helps with motivation and understanding the business. And if your goal, like you mentioned, is not to run the day-to-day.
Right, more focus on growth.
Then you need to make sure the business has enough profit margin, enough cash flow to actually hire someone to handle those daily operations. That becomes a key financial filter.
Makes sense. So practically speaking, what types of businesses are good for beginners and what should maybe be avoided?
He generally warns beginners with limited capital away from typical e-commerce, like Shopify stores selling lots of different physical products.
Why is that? Too complex.
Yeah, lots of moving parts. Inventory, shipping, marketing costs, customer service, sourcing. Margins can be thin, and it can get operationally intense fast.
Okay, so maybe not the easiest first step. What is potentially better?
Businesses selling maybe just one core product can be simpler. Content businesses, blogs, newsletters are often good options.
Like the dog frisbee blog.
Exactly. Or micro SaaS, small software businesses, especially B2B, business to business, because customer value tends to be higher than selling to consumers. Think a niche tool that solves a specific problem for a specific industry.
Right. And he mentioned newsletters specifically for me thinking about this podcast.
Yeah, there's a really interesting potential synergy there. Imagine buying a newsletter that already talks about finance or business. You could instantly cross-promote this deep dive to that existing audience, like how the My First Million podcast guys leveraged the Hustle newsletters audience.
Ah, smart. Buy the audience, essentially.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Or buy the newsletter, keep it running, maybe hire writers. He even mentions potentially using AI or overseas writers for some niches, and then use that platform. The email list itself is the core asset.
And you can make money from more than just ads.
Oh, yeah. Sponsorships, selling your own courses, consulting, building a paid community, lots of ways to monetize a targeted email list beyond just banner ads.
Okay, that's definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
Now, the scary part, due diligence. How do you avoid buying crap?
Yeah, crucial question. The number one rule camp repeats. If it looks too good to be true, it almost certainly is. Be super skeptical of claims like, make $10K a month doing nothing.
Right, the passive income unicorns.
Exactly. Think of it like buying a house. You walk the neighborhood. Understand the market, the niche, what's normal before you even look seriously at a specific business. He also uses a hunter analogy. Be in your blind, know what target you're looking for, and be ready when it appears.
Preparation meets opportunity.
Right. And mindset is huge. You have to believe you can do it. Maybe start small, like he suggested, a $5K deal, just to learn the ropes, build confidence.
That immediate feedback loop again.
Yeah, seeing even a little revenue come in quickly after buying is incredibly motivating compared to the long, uncertain road of starting from zero.
Okay, let's get specific. Due diligence for a newsletter. What do you ask for?
First thing, view-only access to their email platform. ConvertKit, Beehive, whatever they use. You need to see the actual subscriber numbers and sending history. Don't just take their word for it.
Verify the list size. What else?
Ask for open rates, click rates, check for consistency. Are they getting 60% open rates every time? Seems unlikely, might be a red flag. Ask how often they clean their list, remove inactive subscribers.
Right, you want engaged readers, not just vanity numbers.
Exactly. Then test it yourself. Act like an advertiser. Ask them, hey, can you send an email promoting my podcast to your list? See what happens. Do you get clicks? Signups. Real results.
Ooh, clever. A real-world test.
Yeah, and verify the money. View-only, Stripe access, maybe PayPal. For bigger deals, you'll want properly reconciled bank statements checked by an accountant.
Trust but verify, especially the money.
Always. And ask about the operations. Who writes the content? How long does it take? Are there templates, standard operating procedures, SOPs? You need to know what work is actually involved.
Makes sense. What about for a content website like the ones on Motion Invest you mentioned? Similar process?
Similar principles, different specifics. You want stable or ideally growing traffic. So get Google Analytics access. Verify the numbers yourself.
Look at the traffic trends.
Yeah. Then dive into how they get traffic. Use tools like Ahrefs or SEMrush to check their keyword rankings. Are they stable? Tanking. That's crucial.
See if their SEO foundation is solid.
Right. And look at backlinks. He mentioned a tool, SiteBuddy, that can find broken or missing affiliate links on a site. Sometimes you can buy a site and instantly boost revenue just by fixing those links.
Ah, potential quick wins.
Exactly. And tools like Lasso can help manage all those affiliate links automatically going forward.
So it's about verifying the current state and looking for easy improvements.
And that ties into the idea of buying good assets. His house analogy again. Better to buy a solid house that needs painting than a crumbling wreck needing new foundations, right?
Especially for a beginner. Don't want to be overwhelmed.
Exactly. A good online business, like a good house, usually has some inherent value. If you buy something decent and realize it's not for you, you can likely sell it again without a huge loss. Buy junk, and you're stuck with junk.
Avoid the fixer-uppers until you know what you're doing.
Pretty much. And avoid trying to do too much. The restaurant owning the farm analogy, focus on what the business is good at. Don't try to vertically integrate everything unnecessarily. Do one thing well.
Keep it focused. Okay, final thoughts? You mentioned niches again.
Yeah, riches in the niches. He gave that example of a tiny newsletter about Microsoft Azure. Small audience, maybe only a few hundred people, but potentially worth a lot to a consulting firm that specializes in Azure.
Because the audience is so targeted and valuable to them.
Exactly. Or an agency with just a few thousand very engaged followers on Twitter in a specific B2B space that can drive serious revenue. Your leverage isn't always money. It can be deep knowledge or interest in a very specific field.
So leverage your expertise.
Right. Understand the difference between a broad media play needing massive scale and a niche business serving a specific, valuable audience. Your unique interest might be your biggest asset.
Okay, great stuff. So wrapping up this deep dive, what's the core takeaway?
I think it's that buying an existing business is a totally legitimate and maybe even smarter path to entrepreneurship for many people. It shortcuts that brutal early stage of finding product market fit and gets you to revenue much faster than starting from zero.
It feels less common, maybe less glamorous than the startup story, but potentially more practical.
Definitely. It might seem unconventional, but if you understand the principles, do your homework, that due diligence is key. You can significantly lower the risk compared to building from scratch. And remember, opportunities exist at all kinds of investment levels, especially with things like seller financing.
So the final provocative thought for everyone listening.
Instead of racking your brain for the next billion-dollar idea, maybe think what's already out there. What existing website, newsletter, small tool, or online community aligns with what you know or care about? Buying that might be your fastest path to owning and growing something real. What could you add your perspective or connections to that already exists?
That's a powerful question. Look at what's already working and see how you can make it better or leverage it. Really interesting perspective.
Definitely worth considering.
Thanks so much for walking us through this. Hopefully everyone listening feels a bit more informed about this alternative path. Maybe revisit that James Camp video with these ideas in mind.
Yeah, and perhaps we can dive deeper into specific parts of the buying process in a